So, welcome to part two. We talked about eponymous numbers, or eponymous laws rather, in the last episode, and today we're going to look at another 14 of those, through the request of some of you guys actually, about some more interesting eponymous laws. So let's get straight to it. Amara's law, which is the overestimation of technology in the short term. So you're basically overestimating technology in the short term. Roy Amara was a researcher and futurist, and he observed that we tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short run and underestimate its impact in the long run. The early hype around VR has led to massive investments, but its transformative impact is unfolding gradually over decades and not as fast as it was once believed. Consider the dot-com bubble in the 1990s. Many internet companies were overvalued, weren't they, based on these short-term expectations? How many of those game-changing technologies faded into obscurity, and which ones have become integral in our lives today? So the over expectation of the technologies was because they expected that technology to be implemented faster than it was. Now, there's no denying the fact that that has now been implemented into our lives today. But as the law suggests, you're overestimating it in the short term, but underestimating it in the long term. So to beat it, we can focus on long-term trends instead of looking at the short term. Let's look at how things plan out over the long term. As we talked about before, the second order thinking. Think about how the knock-on effect will look in 10, 15, 20 years' time. We can maybe look to invest wisely, have realistic expectations with where technology will be, and have that as your time horizon, and stay patient. If you don't see quick returns, don't worry about it. The second for today is Amdahl's law, which is the limits of speed in systems. So Gene Amdahl was a computer scientist, and the law states that the potential speed up of a process is limited by the portion of the process that cannot be improved. It's a bit like the adage of a fleet can only move as fast as the slowest vessel. In software development, parallelizing tasks can speed up processing, but if a portion of the task cannot be parallelized, it becomes a bottleneck. Imagine a car assembly line where most tasks are automated except for one manual inspection. No matter how fast the automated process becomes, the speed is constrained by the manual step. It's a bit like trying to fill a bucket of water when there's a small hole at the bottom. No matter how much you increase the water flow, the bucket will only fill up as fast as the hole allows. So, to beat this law, we need to identify bottlenecks, find the slowest components that are limiting our overall performance, whether that's in a business or whether it's ourselves. We need to prioritize improvements in those key bottleneck areas and accept that actually there always are going to be constraints. And maybe we are required to be more innovative rather, with our approach. Next one is Dunbar's number, the limit of meaningful relationships. So, anthropologist Robin Dunbar proposed that humans can maintain stable social relationships with approximately 150 people. Military units and small communities are often consisted of about 150 individuals that reflects this cognitive limit. Reflect on your social media connections. How many of them do you integrate with regularly and meaningfully? Our social capacity is much like a garden. You can plant many seeds, but only a limited number will thrive with the attention and resources you provide. So we should then focus on deepening key relationships instead of looking for as many relationships as possible. You will then accumulate superficial ones. In larger groups, maybe we should create subunits to foster closeness in those smaller key areas. The next one is the Dunning-Kruger effect, the overconfidence of inexperience. The opposite of this is imposter syndrome, where you're pretty smart but you underplay your expertise. Psychologist David Dunning and Justin Kruger found that individuals with low ability in a domain often overestimate their competence. A novice chess player might believe they can compete with a grandmaster after a few wins, not understanding the depth of the game. So where beginner's luck can come from as well, I think. Um, but that's a separate point, I suppose. But recall a time when you felt confident in a new skill. When you first start something, you thought, "Fucking hell, this is pretty easy. I'm pretty good at this." And then only later do you realise how much more you needed to learn. The more you learn, the more you realise how much you need to learn. In some respects, it's like climbing a hill, reaching the top. You think you've conquered the highest point, only to see that it was a false summit, and actually there's a further summit. It's very much like that. So to beat it then, consult with experienced individuals and they will be able to tell you what your progress is like. There's things that you don't know, and then there's things that you don't know that you don't know. Only someone with much more experience than you can identify those and point you in the right direction. And we need to understand that mastery is a continuous journey and remain open to new knowledge without being dogmatic in our approach. Next one is Duverger's law. Why electoral systems shape political parties. Political scientist Duverger observed that plurality voting systems tend to favour a two-party structure, while proportional representation encourages multiple parties. The United States is a two-party system, really, due to its first past the post electoral framework. Consider how different electoral systems might change the political landscape in your country. Would you shift to a proportional representation, leading to more diverse political parties, maybe? It's a bit like a garden, where the type of soil determines the variety of plants that can thrive. If you change the soil composition, you'll see different flowers emerge. So, to beat it, we need to understand structural influences, recognize how a system can shape behaviors, whether it's political or otherwise, and actually advocate for change. Most people don't want to see change, but actually, change can bring desired outcomes. The next one is Campbell's law, the corruption of measurement metrics. This is quite an interesting one, actually. When a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So, emphasizing standardized test scores, let's say in education, can lead to teaching to the test, can't it? We all know that. We've learned something, but all we need to do is learn it in a way that's going to pass the test. Is that metric then really showing your intellect or your ability in that area? Imagine a gardener who decides to measure their success solely by the number of flowers in bloom. To boost this number, they might only plant fast blooming species, neglecting plants that contribute to a garden's health but bloom less frequently. Over time, the biodiversity diminishes and the soil quality degrades. It's like judging a book solely by its cover, focusing only on the surface metrics, and actually that can be folly. So, how can we beat that? We can use many metrics and look at them together and not isolate them to one. Having a balanced view of what success means, for example. Focus on actual improvement as well, not just beating the system. Next one is Conway's law. Organizations reflect their own communication structures. Systems, rather, and products mirror the communication structures of the organizations that design it. A company with siloed departments might develop software with poorly integrated modules, reflecting their internal divisions. So consider a team building a bridge where engineers, architects, and construction workers don't communicate effectively. The result is obviously going to be a disjoined structure with mismatched components, and that sort of highlights the importance of cohesive collaboration. It's like a choir where each section practices separately without a conductor. The performance lacks harmony. So, to beat it, we need to align communication structures with desired outcomes. If we know we want to be in position A in 6 months' time, who do we need to bring together in order to communicate that end goal? Maybe it's even across teams, that collaboration. The next one, and this is a good one as well, is Cunningham's law. The best way to get an answer is to be wrong. Stating an incorrect fact is more likely to elicit a correct response than asking a question. We see this online, don't we? You say something bad or wrong, people tell you the right answer straight away. So imagine if you're in a foreign city and can't find a landmark. Instead of asking for direction, you walk in the wrong direction. Locals notice your mistake are more likely to intervene and guide you correctly. People like to give the right answer. And actually, sometimes if you want to know how things are done, don't ask, oh, tell me how how you got so successful. Just say, I bet you got successful this way. And they'll correct you because we have a need to correct. So don't fear making mistakes. View them as learning opportunities. And actually, maybe you can make a mistake on purpose to find out the right answer. Next one is Betteridge's law of headlines. If a headline is a question, the answer is no. Journalistic headlines posed as questions often imply a negative answer. For example, is coffee the secret to eternal use? It means it's not. Reflect on these clickbait articles with question headlines. How often do they deliver affirmative answers? It's like a magician asking, is this your card? When it's not. The question creates intrigue but often leads to a negative. So approach these sensational claims with skepticism and read beyond the headlines before forming an opinion. The next one is Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice that which can be explained by stupidity. Don't assume bad intentions when incompetence could be the cause. If someone cuts you out in traffic, they might just be distracted. It might not be malicious, they might just be that stupid. Consider a co-worker who misses a meeting. Instead of assuming they don't value your time, think about other possibilities. Did they forget? Are they incompetent? Was there a scheduling conflict? It's like blaming the weather for ruining your picnic when you forget to check the forecast. Sometimes mishaps are due to oversight, not intent. So sometimes give people the benefit of the doubt, avoid unnecessary conflict, and actually think about the fact that most people are idiots and don't think that they have bad character traits. Next one is Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure. And to be honest, this is very similar to what we discussed earlier, um, in respect of measuring something. Um, and it was called Campbell's law. Um, so we're not really going to go too much into that, but it is something that is very similar in respect of if a metric is used as a target, it loses its effectiveness as a measure. But just remember to choose metrics wisely. The next one is the law of triviality, which is Parkinson's second law. Why we waste time on small decisions. People often give disproportionate weight to trivial issues, don't they, while neglecting more important ones. Oh, should I wear a red or blue t-shirt? Who gives a shit? Think about the bigger questions. A committee might spend more time debating the office coffee brand than $1 million budget. Is it procrastination? What is it? But don't focus on the minor details. Focus on the big ones. It's like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Pointless, imbecilic, futile. So prioritizing by impact is important. Think about the key decisions and focus on them, and delegate the more trivial decisions to those lower down than you, essentially. The next one is Brandolini's law, the asymmetry of misinformation. This principle asserts that the amount of energy needed to refute misinformation is an order of magnitude greater than that needed to produce it. Obviously, a false rumor spreads rapidly, doesn't it, on the internet? And debunking it requires extensive research, fact checking, and it's sometimes difficult to refute. Imagine a scenario then where someone claims that a particular celebrity has committed a crime. The claim goes viral and gets shared, no verification. To actually debunk it, you need journalists to investigate, you need to gather evidence, interview sources, articles, whatever. And that information probably reaches a fraction of the audience than the false claim did. So another way of looking at it is like trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose. The flames spread quickly, but garden hose is not going to quench it as fast. So promote media literacy. Educate others on how to critically evaluate information sources. Maybe you should verify things before sharing it because, yeah, you don't want to be falling foul to this rule. And support those organisations that fact check properly. And finally is Zawinski's law, the inevitability of future creep. This states that every program expands until it can, for example, read mail, highlight the tendency for software projects, and actually becomes bloated with features over time. So, an example is a simple text editor evolves to include email integration, calendar functions, web browsing, and actually, after time, it becomes cumbersome and less efficient. We didn't want it to do all that, but the program wants to grow and develop. It's like starting with a cozy little cottage, and then you add rooms on, and it ends up being the very mansion that you wanted to get away from because it was difficult to navigate and there was too much space. So sometimes we need to embrace simplicity, focusing on core functionalities, and maybe that's the case for your own life as well. Are you adding things on you don't need to? Do you need it just to be a simple existence? Maybe you're the user and you need to gather your own user feedback. So these eponymous laws are quite interesting, aren't they? I'm not saying that they're all 100% true, all 100% accurate, and some of them actually do go against each other, but it's very interesting to start to think in this way, how things work, what are the core issues, and how we can avoid them. So, again, for the second time, which of those laws were your favourite, and which of those will you try to look for and implement?